Hi, this is Paula Elias, and I'm co-director of the Citizen Jane Film Festival. And I welcome you all to our panel, Women in Film, the State of the Union. We're going to have some fun talking about some real fundamental issues to why we're all here today. What I want to do first is actually go down the table, and I will introduce each one of the filmmakers that are here with us today, and they'll tell just a little bit about themselves so you can contextualize who they are. And I'll start with Brittany Huckabee of Sexy Baby.
Hi. So Paula said to say sort of what we do in the industry, so I guess that's what I'll do. I'm primarily a director, although I do a little bit of everything depending on the occasion and the state of funding at any given time in a project. I'm here with Sexy Baby as producer and editor, and yeah, I've been working mostly in documentary for public television, independent documentaries for public television, feature lengths. I haven't done any shorts. But I'm working on a short right now, so I'm interested in talking to short filmmakers to learn more about that.
Great, thank you so much. We're very excited about your film. It's Sara Lamm.
Hi, I'm Sara Lamm. I've made two feature-length documentaries. The first one was called Dr. Bronner's Magic Soapbox, and that was about Dr. Bronner's Magic Soaps, which you may know if you buy your soap in a health food store. And my second film is Birth Story, which is what we've brought to the festival. I co-directed it with my friend Mary Wigmore. And it is about a group of midwives who were a big part of the natural birth movement in the 70s and continue working from their home in what was a hippie commune. It is now a cooperative, but it still exists today in Tennessee.
Excellent. Next is Kerri.
Yeah, I'm Kerri Yost. I'm co-director with Paula, and today I'm here representing our film program at Stevens College, which is a women's college, for those of you who are new to our college. And we started a film program 8 years ago. I'm also a filmmaker, and I just finished my most recent film is a short film called X-Ray Man. And then also I'm representing Citizen Jane because it's more than a festival. Most people know us from the festival, but it actually grew out of a film series we started when we started the film program because we realized how important it was to connect our students to people in the industry. And Columbia, Missouri is not in the middle of the film industry, it turns out. And then 2 years ago, we added to that and added a youth program for kids in our community. It's a free filmmaking program for a month, open from kids ages 12 to on up. Typically it's 12 to 14, and that's been really neat. And actually before some of the films at the festival, you'll see messages from them that ask you to silence your cell phones. That was the first film they ever made. So and then at our closing night film, we have a little short they made as well. So I'm part of the overall Citizen Jane world.
Hi, I'm Kristen Fitzpatrick. I'm actually not a filmmaker. I'm a horrible filmmaker. I'm here representing a company we're in New York called Women Make Movies. We're a distributor, and we work primarily, or only actually, with films by and about women. We do a lot of documentary, some narrative. And we distribute now probably about 600 films. It's our 40th anniversary this year, and I want to thank Paula and Kerri for having me, because we've worked with them for years. So it's really an honor to be here with you guys. Yeah, and then in addition, we also have for the filmmakers in the audience, a production assistance program where we help films get made by women, but about any topic.
I actually made my first feature with you guys. It's very, very supportive.
Did you really?
Yep.
Who knew?
I was in the production program.
Fantastic.
And if you're a self-taught filmmaker, it was great mentoring. I will definitely attest to that, yeah.
Yeah, and I can tell more details later about what we do. And then specifically, I work within the exhibition world with film festivals, with the films that we have, and I also work on the acquisitions part, so kind of curating what the company picks up each year. And we release about 25 films a year. Oh, and also I just want to say we have orchids in the festival, so everyone should buy their ticket.
Michelle?
My name is Michelle Davidson, and the film that I wrote and directed here is a short film called A Senior Moment. I'm also the president of Kansas City Women in Film and Television. I started off in television and then got into film, so I kind of work in both worlds. I have a couple TV shows that I host and produce. One of them is called Cinema KC, and it's a weekly show that we showcase short films from all over the area. So.
My name is Miriam Bale, and I'm also not a filmmaker. I'm a writer and a programmer. I write for freelance and program freelance. I write for Filmmaker magazine and Cineast and Film Comment and a lot of publications. And I'm a programmer. I started a small film festival in New York called the La Di Da Film Festival. and I'm the one-man show. I'm the director, and I do everything. And then I also program at just about every other venue in New York on a freelance basis. Mostly retrospective titles, but also Kristen and I are part of a cooperative film series that we do every other week. That's a feminist film series.
Excellent, yeah. So we've got a pretty great panel. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to talk just a little bit about the State of the Union so we can all be really depressed, because actually somebody did this to me on a radio show earlier in the week, and they started just telling some of the statistics of how well we're doing in the industry, and finally we were just like, stop, I don't want to hear anymore, because it's not really exciting. We actually look at the celluloid ceiling, which is a study done every year to kind of see how well we're doing. And one of the chief barometers that we look at is the percentage of women who helm the top 250 grossing films in the country. And actually, it's going down. It's going the wrong direction. A couple of years ago, it was 13%. Then it went to 9%. Then it went to 7%. Last year, it was 5% of the top 250 grossing films were directed by a woman. This is actually one of the reasons why, as our 5th year for Citizen Jane Film Festival, we chose The End of the World as our theme. Because for us, if the end is just the beginning, that's a good thing. I mean, we want the end of that world. We are ready to do something different. We've got some amazing women with incredible talent who need to tell their stories, and people need to see these stories. And so that's what we're doing here, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Some other real quick statistics for you. Last year, females accounted for 33% of all characters in the top 100 domestic grossing films. Only 11% of all clearly identifiable protagonists are female, while 78% are male. So what this means is that when we go to see a film at the multiplex, the vast majority of them are directed by men, so it's men's stories that are being told, or it's women's stories that are being told by men. Most of the people, the leads in the film are men. Most of the stories revolve around men. Most of the women are young, and most of the men are middle-aged and romantically involved, which I don't understand that at all. But what we really want to do today is just kind of talk through, from all of your experience, and we've got a wealth of experience on this panel. I'd really like to know if you feel that these statistics ring true as your experience. And again, we'll go down the line and pipe up if you want to say something, pass if you don't. But really, I'd like to know if you feel like these experiences ring true for these statistics ring true for your experience, and kind of give us just a little snapshot of how the state of the industry affects you.
Well, since I work in independent documentaries, there's actually quite a few women that you run into working in that field: directors, producers, maybe fewer editors and cinematographers, but still quite a few. Of course, we're not the people who are pulling in the money or who have decision-making authority. When I've been in to pitch ideas to executives and decision makers and the people who hold the purse strings, more often than not, they are men. And more often than not, they look at me like they're quite amused that I'm coming in to ask them for money. Sometimes I think that's probably because I look younger than I am, and they think, who are you to be asking anything? But then I always overcome that. I think that in some ways it's helped a little bit because people underestimate me, and so then I sort of surprise them, and it often works to my advantage. But one of my first jobs, I was producing, and my boss had given me a budget, and there wasn't enough money allocated for this or that. And so I went to his office to explain to him why we could not do this for this amount of money and so on. And he literally patted me on the head and told me not to worry my pretty little head about that. So that was an introduction to the way that women sometimes are handled. But I mean, to be really honest, I focus less on that. I'm much more interested in the experience of the women whose lives I'm documenting, because I feel like they have it way worse than I do. So that's sort of my perspective. Right now I'm working with some homeless women, and dealing with the issue of women who have criminal records can't get work, and women who are in protection from domestic violence situations can't get the help they need through state programs and things like that. So that's really what I'm thinking about, less than how hard it is for me as a woman in my industry. But that's just where I'm coming from. I'm not, in Hollywood, and I'm not a decision maker, and so I think my experience may be different than some other people's.
Though I will say that when we did the Stevens College Citizen Jane Summer Film Academy this summer, we work with young women, very young women, and we told them the statistics of the 5%. And I remember one, I think she was a 13-year-old girl, said, "Oh, that's great," and I was like, "What's great about it?" She said, "There's so much opportunity for me." So I love the way she saw it.
That's great.
What kind of input do you have, Sara?
Well, let's see. We were just talking about a recent copy of the DGA Quarterly, which arrived at my house, not because I am a member of the DGA, unfortunately, but because my husband is. So, I mean, start right there. You're in a household where there are two directors. One of them makes the kind of work that allows him to be a member of the DGA, and another one who isn't. Follow that up by the fact that we share children. I mean, we have children, and so we have to figure out, who's taking care. Hopefully, we share the children as well. But we have to figure out who's taking care of the kids, and that's a serious issue that really comes into play when we're figuring out who's going to go away for a job, who's going to stay home. You can't. Production life is so incredibly intense, and I don't think you can have two people going full force all the time and still maintain a family. It's just impossible.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, some of it by choice and some of it by default, I'm doing the primary caretaking of my kids. And so that affects the other choices that I have available to me. So the DGA Quarterly arrives, and I open it up, and there's like a list of all the DGA screenings. So they do special screenings of films that their members are working on. It's 2 full pages. There's probably 10 directors with their photographs and their films on each page, and there's not a single woman. And I'm talking about 2 full pages full of columns. There are 2 people of color, and the rest are white men. And I just sat there, like I literally sat down on the steps, and I thought, I can't even believe that the Directors Guild allows this to go out into people's homes. Like,
aren't they ashamed?
I was really shocked. And I think as in preparing to come and sit on this panel, I talked to some other friends that I have working in Hollywood, women directors, and I asked them, that same question, like, why is it that the numbers are going down instead of going up? And I think, people just don't have easy answers or easy solutions for how to change it. One of the things that I've been talking about with my directing partner is taking the value that we get out of making films that are meaningful to people, where we have women coming up and hugging us and saying thank you for making this, and how did you do it, taking all of that and unfortunately monetizing it in our brain so that each time we get a hug it's worth $500. so we have a running pile of heart money that we are actually we're keeping track of it via email. I mean, it's sort of silly, but it's a way of trying to help us think about the difference between money that you get because you're working for a studio because you're making something that sells products or sells tickets in a particular kind of way, and the unfortunate lack of resources that you have oftentimes to make something that speaks to people on a very human level. So I don't know, those are some ideas to play with.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of questions, but I want to move on to Kerri and kind of get some input.
Well, I mean, building on that, it's funny. I get American cinematographer because I'm a DP, and there's only, I think, 5 women in the ASC now, the American Society of Cinematographers. There was 6, but one of them died. I could be wrong, though. Please, somebody. It can't be more than 6, I assure you. And again, it's an invitation-only club. And I think that's a challenge. Like a lot of the students here at Stevens, they want to go into the exact industries where there are no women, like being a DP or being a director. That's what they're interested in. And so it's really disheartening to see that statistic. And I think when it's an invite-only club, of course you invite the people that look like you. And so that to me seems to be a common problem I hear from lots of people. The Academy is the same way, and all of these really important, prestigious organizations that let you go further in your career. My own personal experience as a filmmaker rings true to almost every guest filmmaker I've ever had here, whether they work in television in LA, whether they work in a small production company. When I remember I learned filmmaking through various channels, but I was living in Poland really soon after communism fell, and it was very hard to get any equipment. So anyway, me and my co-director, who was a brassy Scottish woman, we didn't really realize we were the only women because we were so foreign, but we were certainly a handful of women working. And To edit our movies, we would use a television station late at night that wasn't using their stuff, and we would bribe them with whiskey to edit our films because you also couldn't get whiskey very easily. And the guys would just be like, you don't know how to use it. And it's the same editing bay that we used in Scotland and America. And we're like, we do know how to use it. But they would stay for almost every night for a week and drink their whiskey and watch us and be like, wow. I mean, they tested us and they looked over our shoulders. And then when we were done, they let us come in and we could use subtitles and all these other things. But it was that testing period where everybody's watching you. And that's what I hear constantly from guest filmmakers, particularly in television, where a director, the television crew stays together and they get new directors, and then that director then edits the piece and that kind of thing. So a director is really tested. And if you're a female director, they always tell me they will do the most complex scenes first and win their crew. And men just don't get tested that way. In fact, I have a lot of male friends who don't know much about filmmaking, and the DP will give them all the answers, and it's like, well, sure, I don't feel like women get that support. They sort of test you. I hear that from interns, from my students who go out and do internships. They're typically the last in the office to be asked to do something because they'll ask the young guys first, but it turns out they're well-trained technically, and then when they finally ask them, they'll get the job and they'll do a good job. And once they can do a good job, then it's all gone. Then I think our industry really values what you can do. But it's to get that chance and to be tested. And I think when you see large films come out, if a woman has a really successful film, it's like, well, that was kind of a fluke. Let's see what the next film is like. Whereas I feel like when a guy comes out and has a huge splash at a film festival, it's like, here, make your next movie. I hear that over and over again. This isn't my experience, but I've heard that countless times from female filmmakers.
Great, yeah.
Yeah, I think my experience is a little bit different because I'm not a filmmaker, so I'm kind of coming at it from the industry side of things, and that's also to say I kind of also work in a bubble. Women make movies is a very kind of privileged position to hold, especially when you're concerned with like the inequity in the industry, because you're surrounded by not only an all-woman staff, but all of our filmmakers are women, and our films are specifically about women, at least in the distribution side of things. So for me, the inequity that's in the industry, the production industry side of things, is a little harder to kind of calibrate from where I sit, but at the same time, the necessity of Women Make Movies clearly indicates that there is this inequity, right? So, and Women Make Movies was founded first as a filmmaking cooperative for women to learn how to make film in the 70s, and they changed later on in the early to mid 80s during Reagan into distributing films. And I guess for me, what rings really loudly and why, and from my experience, like why Women Make Movies is so important is, and I don't want to say not so much the production side of things, but who's telling the stories, I think for me is super important, especially because a lot of we work again primarily with doc, and most of our stuff is social justice, human rights related, and a lot of international women's issues. And I think there's power in women telling women's stories, the way that they tell it, the way that they shoot it, the way that they frame it. And oftentimes, historically, I think that those stories either weren't told or were told in a way that perhaps was insensitive or exploitative. So being part of a distribution company that, definitely tries to champion not only women filmmakers, but their voice, it's an important one. And again, my director Debbie does panels a lot, and one of the things we always joke about and say is that the day that Women Make Movies doesn't exist and we don't have a job is actually like a really great victory, because the fact that we have existed for 40 years is fantastic and amazing as a nonprofit, but it still basically points to the fact that there's this issue, right, that needs to be addressed. So,
yeah.
My background's a little bit different because I came from journalism, television journalism, went to University of Missouri, and there are a lot of women that are telling stories in television. We're shooting, we're editing, we're writing, we're lighting, we're hosting, we're doing everything. And in newsrooms, there are actually more women than men, and I've had several female news directors and managers. I never saw that. And once I had kids, and I was like, what do? I don't want to be covering murders every day. I'm like, let's do film. I was like, it's the same thing, right? It's telling stories. It's through a visual medium. Well, obviously they're very, very different, first of all. So it's when I got on set and I was one of the few women other than the makeup artist. And you kind of look around. Okay, and I work in Kansas City, so you mix to stay productive. You mix making commercials and industrials with doing film. So I'm on set a lot, and again, I just kept looking around, and I didn't see women. I didn't see female DPs. I didn't see female producers, and I certainly didn't see female directors. So when I got involved with Women in Film in Kansas City, we're hoping obviously to change that and kind of bridge the gap between the two. Why are women so successful in television and not in film? And I don't really know the answer to that other than it needs to change.
Yeah, there's so many good things I'd like to respond to, but to Paula's original question, is it 6% or 5%?
5, yeah.
5% women, and why has that gone down? And I have no idea. It's just so depressing. It's just so structural, and it's so insidious. And so we can talk about it on this panel, but I just think it's going to take millions of conversations and so much action. But the 11% protagonist is even more disturbing to me. And what you said about women's stories by men, and that's even a more subtle, that's a really subtle thing. And that's one of the reasons I started programming, is because there are a lot of films, most of the programmers and the film audiences for these retrospectives, the film geeks in New York were guys, 80% guys. There's maybe 2 or 3 women in these audiences. But, and I was one of those women. But there were a lot of those films I just didn't like. And, it's just a gut feeling of because there are no real women in those films. It's not blatant sexism, but there's just nothing to my experience. And there were some films by men and women that felt real. There were women who had, who were real women. They were complicated. They weren't just there as reflections of the men or objects, not subjects. And so I started programming those films, and the audiences were at least 50%, 60% women. And they were not geeky guys. They were very strong-willed, attractive women. And they were out there. They were just a completely different audience. And so I forgot to say that another thing that I do is that I'm the editor of an online feminist film journal called Jones Digest. I forgot I do that too. And, but I started that because these women there were films that weren't being talked about, and it was just, I think all of these women, these female film fans, were watching movies at home, and they didn't have a community. They were in isolation. They weren't getting the important gigs to write long form about these films, and so I wanted to form a community where that could happen, and but that's and that gets into one of the reasons why, and there's so many reasons, but I found it was really important to form a girls' club, a women's, because the reason is why film and not television is there's just this long history of a boys' club, and people aren't overtly sexist. The men in these aren't overtly sexist. It's just they have these networks and these habits and these people who they recognize as authorities, who are masculine forms of authority, and it's really and that's, I think, the major problem is this boys' club that still exists. And I really don't know how to battle that. I've tried to battle it, and I think it's kind of impossible. I think that the only way to battle that is to form really strong networks of women. That's what I found, the only thing that works. Those are the only thing that's reliable. A women's relationship to an all-boys professional network, I've found, is tentative. It's it can be, you can be the token girl, you can be the one, the one that they let in at the expense of other women. You could be loved at one. It's just, I feel like all women's groups are the only solution. But just one more thing is, I think that your person who said that's great, that's absolutely true, that it is a wilderness. If so many women's stories are being told by men, every single genre picture ever made is totally new and interesting if it's told from a woman's point of view. And I think that's, in my experience of programming,
hope, right?
Yeah, and that's really exciting, you know?
Right. Well, I love it, that, Miriam, that you got into kind of what are we going to do about it. I mean, we can see that there's a problem, and how are we going to fix that. Before we get into that more, I'd actually like to throw a question at you guys that was thrown at me on a radio program this week. Again, it was a really interesting program. But they asked, do I think that I could tell, like if films were stacked up, could I tell something that was directed by a woman versus something that was directed by a man? I contend that I probably could, and I have some reasons why. I think I could. But I'd like to know what you guys think about that and like why you think you could or couldn't. Brittany, you're up.
Wow, I don't know if I know the answer to that. I mean, I like to think that I can tell the stories of women, because that's primarily my interest as a documentary filmmaker, is telling the stories of women, that I can tell the story in a way that a man couldn't. But I'm not sure exactly what you would point out as characteristics. I mean, I think maybe, you know, just a deeper understanding of the issues that women are facing and probing a little deeper and having greater sensitivity, and also just topic selection. I mean, the types of stuff that you're interested in exploring might be something that it wouldn't occur to a man. So I think maybe that too, but that's an interesting question. I'll have to keep thinking about it.
Sara, what do you think?
It is an interesting question. What springs to mind is the Bechdel test that we were just talking about, which if any of you don't know about it, you should, because it's such a catalyzing idea. What's her first name? Is it Amy Bechdel?
I think Allison.
Allison. So the test that this woman proposes applying to films, is there more than one female character with a name? Do those two female characters with names speak to each other? And do they talk about something besides a man? And, right? I mean, shocking. And a million of the movies that you know and love do not meet those three criteria. And as soon as you start trying to apply that, you quickly realize that it's kind of rare. So I would hope that films that are being directed by women would meet that and go above and beyond. And we could start, unfortunately, we could possibly have to start there.
Right, no, I think it's a great way, a qualitative way of looking at it. Kerri, what's your...
I think I possibly could. I don't know. I mean, I curate a women's film festival, so when I go to festivals, I really look at films made by women, and then every other film I see typically is not. And possibly the way I would know straight off is that there is a female protagonist. I mean, that's really true, even without hearing those statistics. When we were teaching the Citizen Jane Film Academy, we were coming up with bumpers, what you play before a festival, and we were looking at other bumpers from other film festivals, and they all, of course, had this boy in wonder growing up, dreaming to be a filmmaker, like a little Steven Spielberg. And then, you know, the commercial would, of course, he would meet somebody, and he would, at the end of the commercial, be a filmmaker. And they got depressed because we found about 30 of these, and they were all young boys.
Wow.
And so that just says something. If our future is also that, what is wrong with that? And that's also last year when we looked at this too. That was when, what was the movie that came out? Super 8? Again, like these young kids being filmmakers. Is that the right movie?
Yeah.
Okay. But then I have to say, I came home and I watched a commercial on TV. I think it was HP, and it was the same concept, and it was a little girl. And it was a really cool, slick, highly budgeted commercial. And it was her dad, and she picked up a camera, and she did all this cool stuff with the camera. And I was just like, thank you, HP. I think I'll buy an HP printer. Because I know that commercials actually reach far more people than a television show. And it'd be little things like that. You know, and I think I've learned from teaching film theory, it's not what's there. I mean, we recognize racism and sexism when we see it. It's very, I think we as people recognize it. It's what's not there that tends to be the most dangerous, in my opinion. And that's having looked at all, I mean, there's a lot of people not represented on film. Truthfully, I feel like if you're not a white man, you're not represented on film. So it's what's not there that's dangerous, because we assume that's normal.
That's a great point.
Right. Yeah, I mean, as far as, you know, back to the, can you tell the difference between, you know, a male or a female directing? Also part of a radio interview that I had to do in the Czech Republic, which I'll first just say, you know, the type of feminism there is much different than, you know, we have in the States. And I kind of knew going into this interview that this interviewer was pretty much had it out for me. You know, and his first question was basically like, so, you know, can you tell me what it's like to work for a sexist organization? And, you know, and so there was a huge kind of conversation that unfolded some at moments loudly, other times, you know, in defiance. I wouldn't speak to him, but you know, and it was interesting because we started talking about that and like filmmaking styles, and you know, and he was more interested in kind of technique and the way things are framed and what you choose to shoot and that. But what you know, what I took from that was interesting, and then kind of also based on conversations I have with a lot of our filmmakers, you know, there's a little bit sometimes of a danger of saying, yes, there is a difference between films that women make, you know, and it's kind of like a biological essentialism, you know, of the filmmaking world. Like if you say it's something different, well then it will continue to be different, and it will continue to be something of its own and separate from, you know, perhaps the bigger thing at hand. And you know, but then that also goes to say that, like, I feel like, you know, having watched so much film, you know, and especially documentary, you know, in the way that the stories are told, like, I do sometimes feel that there's a difference, you know, in the way that, you know, certain sensitive topics are handled and such. So I don't know what the right answer is, if it's better to be, I think it depends on the day that I'm asked and how I'm feeling. You know, some days I'm like, yes, there is a difference, and then other days, like, I worry, like, ooh, well, what does that mean that there's a difference, you know, kind of thing. So yeah, I don't really know if that answered it, but that's meandering kind of like of all of it.
I could give a different answer tomorrow. I think that really is true.
Yeah, that's good. Michelle?
I don't know the answer to that either. I think that we all want to tell stories that connect with everyone and resonate with everyone. I tend to write stories with strong female protagonists, but then I'll hear the guy in the audience laugh the loudest, you know, and connect with it, even though it's told from a female point of view. But again, kind of going back to from journalism, you just try to tell a great story, you know, and hope it connects with someone. But again, it goes back to my point of view is still a woman. I write men's voices, I write characters, but I probably write better female voices because I know that experience. I know what it's like to be a mom. I would write a better mom than I would write, you know, a man who got back from serving in the military. I just would.
In answer to your question, yes, absolutely. And I don't want to just leave it there. But when I can't tell, and it's directed by a man, that is so nice. And there are a few directors, Jacques Rivette and Howard Hawks, who have directed some of the best, like, really equal, like, female characters, really strong females. And I can't tell. I mean, I know because I know those directors, but those are films that we cover often in the Feminist Film Journal. We're not limited to just females, movies by men. And I think that's something that I often in some of the press that I've done about the Feminist Film Journal, I think the importance of it is not just political, but it's narrative. Because if someone is not Jacques Rivette or Howard Hawks and is making a film where there's not a real female character, that's not just sexist, that's bad filmmaking. Like, that's like the purpose of film is that you are able to see beyond one subjective point of view, and that you're able to make stories that are really multifaceted. And I really think that it's not just a problem of sexism, it's a problem of good filmmaking and good narrative, and that leads to, and having strong narratives affect so much of the way we live in the world. Like, if you don't see real women represented, it keeps on those stereotypes, it keeps on those roles. And so I think that I think that this problem is a really huge problem, artistically and in the world.
Yeah. I actually saw a film a few years ago called The Debt that starred Helen Mirren, and I mean, it's a fine film. But the thing about it that struck me was that they had these amazing close-ups of this 60-some-year-old Helen Mirren, and I just sat there. I wanted to watch it like 30 times over and over again. I was just like, being able to see this. I mean, she's obviously beautiful, but this woman with wrinkles and, you know, just being right there and huge, and it really was a powerful thing because, I mean, I was struck that I don't get to see that, and I'm hungry for it.
Yeah.
I would love to hear any kind of questions or feedback from the audience. If you guys have some thoughts, you can step up to the... Yeah, if grab the mic if you would so we can hear you. Thanks.
I recently noticed a lot of people are celebrating Joss Whedon as a feminist film director, but they use that exact same term to dismiss movies by women. So I was wondering, just like, what do you think is a way to get around that, and how do we move forward from that kind of mindset?
It's a great question. So if you're a feminist filmmaker as a man, you're good. If you're a feminist filmmaker as a woman, you're bad. Thank you for that question. Who would like to jump in on that one?
I think it's only good for just the reasons I just said.
I read an article in O magazine recently, and I think it was an interview with Viola Davis, who was talking about how challenging it is to be a person of color trying to act in Hollywood. And she said it was frustrating, blah blah blah. But she said, but there's a way in which I feel like marching into Hollywood and demanding that it be a certain way is like walking into somebody else's house and say, put that picture over there, move that piece of furniture over there. And I was like, oh, okay. Like it was kind of a light bulb for me, because I was like, okay, so what is the house that I want to build? What does my house look like? So my house is a feminist house, and this is what it looks like there, and this is how people behave there, and this is how set works there. And it was just like this great sort of visual image to start to think about, okay, well, how do we want to decorate our house? And to stop thinking about how we can't go have a seat and walk in and get a glass of water over there. Anyway, it's an image to work with, kind of.
Yeah, I like that. Any other questions?
I just want to say something that Miriam said there about, like, I think it's really bold that you're saying we have to have a network of women, we have to have a women's club, because I think that's something people are almost scared to say from feminism. I mean, I'd love to hear what Julia Reichert would have to say about that. She programs something called From the Archives, and she'll be doing this. She was supposed to be on the panel, but she's en route here. But it's actually looking at women's history and looking at films that were made during the second wave feminist movement by just the few female filmmakers that had a camera. And that's clearly what they were going for. But they, that generation's kind of like, we're so happy to be here, we don't want to complain, there's that underlying issue with feminists in all industries, I have a feeling. But at the same time, I've noticed, like, even from Citizen Jane, just by bringing people together, talking about their projects, they go on and go do stuff, and then they talk and they support. Like, Kristen told me about Jones Digest, and I wrote it down. We were talking in the spring about something else, and then I looked at it, and I literally was like, oh my gosh, I just opened up a candy store, because I teach film theory, and you actually review not just films right now, but films from the past that I know really well that, honestly, I never thought of it in that way. The way it's being written about, which is really, for me, practically awesome, because I teach film classes and I have to supplement every single textbook I have, because we're not in it. We're just not in it. So our film history is like every other history, but what's concerning about film is it's a very short history, and we're still not in that. And so because of these things, like Jones Digest and some other areas, we have to supplement it. And so I do believe, I don't even think it has to be a formal movement, but a sort of informal support to help each other make these movies and get them seen. That's how I see women doing it today.
Absolutely, and places like this, and Sarasota Film Festival has a Sarasota Women Network.
Yeah.
That's where I met Kim Sherman, who's here, and other people who've become some of the most, Amy Simons too has a film here, and they've become some of the most important people in my life. And it's the same way that men form these boys clubs. I really do think it's essential. Something Kristen and I have talked about, and this is shouldn't say this while the cameras are on, but I've also I've run into a lot of sexism, blatant and not so blatant, and for a while also the biggest support that I found was through these something that in New York we call the gay mafia. These are gay men who are part of these film industries, and they're so supportive of women, but essentially they're still a boys club. It's just a different boys club, and I think that's why I think networks of women are really the only answer.
Well, one of the reasons we were excited you were coming is also there aren't that many female film critics, almost none, and there's not that many film critics in general anymore. And I think it'd be interesting for you guys to go see movies this weekend, decide what really grabbed you, and then go read the reviews. And I find sometimes the criticism about film made by female filmmakers can be problematic. And part of me really feels like we need more female film critics to really be able to discuss some of the films we're seeing better.
Oh, I'm glad you're saying that, absolutely.
Well, I think you've allowed us to segue really nicely into what can we do. I mean, we're talking about networking, and building strong, connected groups of women. Talking about building our own world. But what are some of the resources? What are some of the organizations? What are some ideas about what we can do as a plan of action and a way to move forward to change this? I'd love to just hear from anybody.
Well, I mean, at Women Make Movies, I mean, one of the, in addition to like inequity in the industry, I mean, getting films made is of course very complicated financially. So we, in addition to supporting films made by women, one of the things that we really consciously try to do is make sure that, that there's a royalty that's paid back to the filmmaker so that they can kind of continue to make films, and it's something simple and very basic, but that's what we were hearing a lot from the women filmmakers is like, we need to get paid, we need to be able to continue to make these films. So as an organization, that's something that we do. But then as far as other resources, I mean, I feel like the doc world, there's definitely a bit more, I would say, like for women to kind of make film. There's a really, for anyone that doesn't know, Chicken and Egg, which is based in New York. They're a grant-giving organization. They're fantastic. Tribeca Gucci Fund, another fantastic organization. There's so many. Cinetic, that really do offer some amazing finishing funds for doc, and they do tend to have a lot of programs that focus on films by and about women. But then, as Miriam said, like, I mean, I feel like in any tenet of life, even film or not, really building the bridges that you want to build. I mean, I'm a big proponent of collaborating and, finding, what is the film, if you build it, they will come? I mean, it's kind of really true, like with everything. And I mean, I've worked with Kerri almost everyone on this panel, it's networks like these that get things done. If we're distributing a film, it's most likely, Women Make Movies is a film by Brittany, and, we distribute it. And, Miriam and I work on a series together, and she writes about films that, like, I want to watch and I want people to read about, and writing about our films. And so I think that, that's probably, like, one of the biggest points to drive home is, like, to find that network, because it's there. And if it's not there, then you need to start it, because most likely someone else in your area is going to want it as well. So collaboration is really key.
I think one of the things, too, that we need to overcome is being competitive. I think there's so few spots for women, especially in these, in the positions of power, that I've found that women sometimes are very competitive. And I think we need to figure out a way to get over that, and just be aware that it's there. And that's sort of the last thing that we need to be doing is knocking each other down and feeling like there's not room for all of us.
I think that can be hard, though, because of the whole scarcity complex, and I think in many ways society does play on that, and it builds it up and makes us feel like there's only, a couple of, really plum spots, and so I have to fight my way there. And I think that, honestly, I think women tend to be more naturally collaborative, and I think that that is not a natural way to be as women, honestly, just in a way of acting. Go ahead, Miriam.
No, I absolutely agree. I think that goes back to, like, in the boys club, they will allow one token female, and so women will compete with that, and that's part of keeping this, like, women competitive against other women. Mm-hmm. That women competitive against other women is, like, the #1 form of sexism, right. Like, in whether it's personal or professional. But I have found that if you do, in these women's group, women are naturally collaborative. Right. Like, that competitiveness is part of of that long tradition that we're talking about. And if you're able to, as you said, build your own house, I found women don't have that same, like, hierarchy and collaboration. They're, like, also just don't have that same sort of status-y thing and that sort of pompousness. They'll be like, oh, I don't know this. Like, can you help me with this? It just, I think that's true. I mean, it's not proven, but I found it's really true. And I think it really goes back to what you were saying about how do you build your own house. And that's something that, and actually something that you were mentioning too, Kerri, is that, I think it was Kerri, it was about the Boy Wonder. Did you talk about the Boy Wonder? Melissa Silverstein of Women in Hollywood did this thing in the New York Times, and it was all these women talking about this problem. And I thought that one of the most remarkable things was something Martha Coolidge said about that everyone's looking for the boy wonder, and like we need to foster like a girl wonder. And this is another one of these problems, is the archetype and the image of an auteur is often like the bad boy or the trans Malik, but it's the boy wonder. And that's, I think, part of the problem that women run into with not all women directors can make a movie, but how do they get through the producers to make a big budget movie? How do they get a second movie made? Because like, that's a really big problem. Women can make a first movie, but not a second. And I think a lot of that is like playing the part of the director. Like, how do you play that role as a woman when there's not a history, a role model to look to? And so I think the number one resource is imagination. It's like you said, is like trying to create that archetype of someone who is an authority, but in a way that feels natural to a woman, where you're not modeling yourself after, like Dorothy Arzner is such a famous woman director, but she had a very masculine persona. And to look back into history and find like there's just so few role models, and women have to become that role model in a way that's organic.
Well, and then that, if you really want to know more, you should check out that discussion thread that New York Times did, because they have, just look up New York Times Women in Hollywood, and they have a lot of the main women players in this field talking about it. And I found it refreshing, because I talk about this a lot, and I noticed a constant thing now about respecting the female consumer. That was mentioned over and over again, and because there's some discussion that actually, we do market research for the festival, and the average age and gender of somebody at our festival is about a 50-year-old woman. And that surprised me, because we're a college town, and I see all these young people falling in. And that's what they're realizing in Hollywood, is they're women with money. College students don't have as much money to go to movies, and they're older, and their kids are gone, and they could go see movies. But you know what? There's no movie for them to see, even if they wanted to. I mean, name one film. And this summer, gosh, it seems like they're scraping the bottom of the barrel with superheroes now. You know, who could have their own movie? But Wonder Woman hasn't been a movie yet, and so that's actually our closing night film. I mean, it's like, but nobody's questioned that. Nobody said, oh, all these superheroes are men, and I find that really problematic. But I do think a lot of filmmakers say this, you know, just buy a ticket. But that to me doesn't seem, that seems like a really simple answer, that the problem is those movies aren't there to buy a ticket. I do feel like there's far more women who would go to the movie theater if there were more films that satisfied their appetite. But because they're not there, then that gives Hollywood another excuse to not make movies for them.
It's good for everybody to know that Women in Hollywood has a blog, and you can put your email address in, and they'll send you a list every week of films that are being made by women, films that are about women, films that have been written by women, and films that have been directed by women.
Yeah, and I think when we're talking about resource, I mean, that's a great resource, but I think it's also a paradigm shift, because in order to address this problem and really be able to attack it and fix it, we are our greatest resource. And we have to start really thinking about ourselves as our greatest resource, because I think part of the culture teaches us that we don't have anything to offer, and it teaches us that we should look to someone else to solve our problems. And so it really is getting back to looking at each other and looking down the row of this and looking out at all of you. We are our greatest resource for being able to fix this.
And just jumping in, just talking about it is healing in a way, right? I mean, just talking about it, naming it, saying out loud in a group, it helps you feel like, you know what, the reason why I'm in this situation is not just because I'm me and I'm a defective filmmaker in some way, you know, because you can get really internal about that. But when you start to see like, oh, there's systemic things that are going on, and we're all in a shared way sort of up against it, it's so relieving.
Right, there really is a problem.
Yeah, it really is a problem.
I thought there might be.
I thought about what women make movies must feel like, because I feel like, having only been 5 years old, I mean, I've written about Cannes and having no women, and, you know, there's certain stories I can just pull my blog from last year and it'd be the same thing. And, I mean, 40 years, you know, jeez.
So, okay, our final question, unless I'll open it up one more time. And
I don't think we have much time, actually, so from what I've been told.
I'm on it. Any quick questions from the audience? Okay, so what we'd like to do to end, of course, we want to thank Columbia Access Television for their incredible support and for filming this. But also, I'd like to just hear from anybody that wants to finish with, what do you think the future holds for us? A couple of words, maybe. Anybody inspired by?
The future 2 days will be awesome.
That's true.
We're going to have an apocalyptic experience.
The world will change in the next 2 days, for sure, for sure. Anything else?
But I mean, my point is that
Michelle.
it's moving too slow. So, so when I think about the future, I get a little depressed.
Yeah.
I think just be bold. Our organization, Kansas City Women in Film, was 10. It had 10 members in a year. Now we have close to 100. And that's just one little pocket. And we started a short screenplay contest because we wanted to, I think writing is a great way to tell your story. So start writing. I mean, it blew me away. We started the short screenplay contest and give $1,000 prize to make your short film to anyone around the world. And we got submissions from all over, from the Middle East, from Canada, and the winner actually came from Kansas City, which was pretty cool. But it was inspiring to see people that they're like, okay, I can do this. Sit down and write, and find your voice, and then tell a really good story, and that will open doors. That's what opened doors for me as a filmmaker is writing a good story that connected with anyone, man, woman, and that's how I prove myself. So I don't know if so. Go do it. Write. Yeah. Tell your story. That's great.
I also think that if women filmmakers will refuse to take no for an answer in the way that men always have, that we'll get somewhere. I was thinking about that in the last panel I was on. I mean, that's ultimately what it takes to be a filmmaker. Is just refuse to take no for an answer, because every door you open, someone's there saying no, 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 and you just have to be like, yes, I'm going to do it. And I think if women do that we can get there.
Yeah, and I mean, definitely don't have an idea of what the future will be like. Some days hopeful, some days not. But I think one of the most important things that I've learned, I've been at Women Make Movies 15 years, and is mentoring. I mean, there's this next generation, and it's so important. I mean, people don't realize kind of like the amount of power and knowledge that they have, just at any level in the industry, but there's always going to be someone, kind of right behind you, like, that's up and coming, and like what you have to, like, I think about myself and how limited the mentoring was, and I feel like that sometimes happens for women in the industry, that you don't necessarily have like a mentor to look to or to talk to, but kind of keep that in mind when you do find the younger ones coming up, to like really invest in what they're doing and give them the information that you have to kind of help them move forward. And there's so many youth programs right now with young girls that are learning to shoot, learning to frame, like learning really early on, and it's fantastic, to kind of keep building on that. So yeah, that would be kind of, I guess for me, something to build on for the future, for sure.
The hope, right.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank all of you for coming, and I want to thank you guys very, very much for talking about this, and I'm really, really excited that you were able to help us kick off the beginning of Citizen Jane Film Festival 2012.